So thank you everyone for joining. This is it's been a while since we've run a user group for Loop. Apologies, I should have found another good reason to do so. But this is the August session. I think the last one we had was with May, and we were going through Word Online and various things that were being components that were being released in the additional spaces that we might not normally expect. It was Whiteboard and Word Online. Occasionally, we like to also have a discussion and session where we talk about how we're using Loop. And so that will be part of today's session. And we've got Rob along who will talk a bit about that. So that's a bit further along, but a bit more on the agenda. Maybe not. There we go. We put you last for some reason. Funny. Right. Let me just correct all this. Did I finish off with Rob? We should start with Rob up here. That's good. Cool. All right, agenda-wise, we are going to look at what's new in Loop. I have jumped on the hashtag because it does help us to find across socials what is new. It was certainly helpful for catching up with some of the roundup for today. So it is a slightly different format. What we did used to do is used to run this out of a Mirror interactive whiteboard, or to have you all in would be floating around the screen and looking at various things. But today we'll just keep it a bit simpler. We'll talk with Rob about Loop at Cisilion, and it's good to hear other stories about how people are using Loop, and it does inspire us about how we might use that for different collaborative scenarios. We still will have our breakout session, right? So this is where we do break out into a couple of groups. I'll look at roughly how many people are there, and we'll divide and get groups of about 4 or 5, and that's just our opportunity for 10, 15 minutes or so just to have a chat and say, okay, what did we just hear? Let's talk about how we're using it in those small groups, and don't worry too much about how we're randomly put together with different people. It's okay to make a start and share, but I feel that's one way we can bring a bit more interaction into online-based user groups. We will bring it all together, talk a little about what we've learned from the breakout groups, and round it out. Great. So kicking into what's new in Loop. I'm not going to take you through everything. It's interesting, like some people have reacted to what's new in Loop in an interesting way. They say, well, hey, you're bringing this and that in, but why don't you do what we've been wanting for months? And it's just really that I guess awareness of how development works in a team, and that the social team that are talking about little things doesn't necessarily mean the bigger things aren't being worked on. So don't worry. What's new in Loop? There's lots coming. I did want to draw attention to one of the big ones that has actually been quite a good inroad for how Loop is being used, but in connection with another significant product, and that is collaborative notes in Microsoft Teams. I think it's fantastic that it's now rolled out to 100%. It is using Loop components, so this is independent of the Loop app. You don't have to have the Loop app turned on to use collaborative notes. And the good thing about it is that it's you can use them throughout the meeting lifecycle. So what we've got in this initial animation here is that the notes have been added into a Loop meeting invite that's been created in Teams, and then we can go into the using it within the meeting. So it's added to the bottom of the meeting invite rather than being in the body or the description of the meeting, which is another place we can add Loop content. One question I get sometimes is, well, are we going to be able to do this also from creating invites in Outlook? Because this is the creation within the Teams experience. And yes, it is coming. So the equivalent experience is going to be there. And you'll be able to add those meeting notes there and see them there too. So that's useful at the beginning of the process, and then once you're in a meeting, then you can jump on in and use them. They are another app-like button, a bit like when you're adding an app or turning chat on, so that it will appear as a pane along the side of your meeting experience. And one advantage of this over the initial experience of loop components is that it's formatted and suits that space better. What we did have and still have today is we could add a loop component to a chat within a meeting, but you get kind of this sliver of a space, and as soon as someone throws a table in there, you don't have much room. So they've done a much better job formatting this. You've got your list of your agenda, you've got tasks, and collaborative meeting notes that you could be taking in real time at the same time. If you haven't added them before your meeting, there is the ability to add them to the meeting as it's running. So that's okay too. One thing that you won't be able to do is add it to, or rather, let me correct this. I was going to say you can't add it to a meeting where you've got guests or people from outside of your organization, but that's not actually true. I found that even just from joining a meeting where I've got someone from outside the org, I'll add them. My team and I can benefit from those notes, but those notes won't be available to the external people just yet. So they're in action, they're working. Of course, you can capture your follow-up tasks, and not really demonstrated here, but it does synchronize with Planner and To Do. So as a follow-on from that meeting, you do have a place where you can manage those tasks. And here's a view of catching up with those notes in the details pane. So there they are after the meeting. You can go through and follow up on different tasks and check out those notes. There's actually a better view of this too that you can see when you go to the recap. So I know this is just a render here, not the full experience, but a recap of the meeting will also include these notes. So you might look alongside the transcript and see, okay, well, that's what was said, and here's a few of the key things that we wanted to draw attention to. You might even, as a way of helping the rest of the people in the meeting, listen through the meeting. Maybe you're going to add a couple of key things there and catch up with the tasks as well. So a lot of different options, but very powerful way of using Loop in a very practical, common situation. Very, very new was the release of the new components for Trello and Jira. These quite interesting. They are the first example of components from third party. And we have seen demonstrations of this much earlier, like in Microsoft Ignite, and we saw various adaptive cards from different places. But this is the first couple of third-party components in action. And so if you are using Jira or Trello, then you have that ability to / and add a Jira or Trello component. And so this is an example of that component in action in the Loop app. And that is where it's initially been released as an interactive experience. When you add it to your Loop page in the Loop app, you'll go through a few initial steps to sign in, to make sure that you're synchronizing things, giving it permission. There's the connective experiences that you have to turn on in the Loop app. I've got this all laid out in a video or so, but ultimately what you end up with is a synchronized copy of your Trello board or your Jira issues, and you can manage them to some extent within Loop. Initially, it's limited to a few things like being able to assign tasks, set a date, drag things around, but we hope to see more interactivity a bit further along. And one of the things you can do, I think I've got this in the next image, yes, okay, is because it is Loop, one other way to share that content is to turn that whole component into a Loop component itself. So remember that crazy thing that we do where we've just put a Loop component on the page, and not only is it on the page, but we can turn that block of text or that block of thing into a Loop component and share it in the places that support Loop. So that's what we've done here, added the Trello board to a Loop component in a chat, and we can use that. Now, it's not interactive in that state. You can't edit it. It's just there for visuals. But again, first release, let's see what they come up with in terms of making this more consistent experience wherever we can use Loop. Just a quick thing for the admins. And this is still, I think, an area of discussion, and maybe Rob will be able to add a bit to this later, but enabling the Loop app within our organizations. There's a few steps to do that. Turning policies on, running a PowerShell script or two, and making sure things are working. And one of the things the Loop team wanted to release was to make that a bit easier, to add a tick box that will take care at least of the policy side of things. It'll set the policies for you in policies.office.com, and then it's available for all of the organization. Now, that's the thing to note. If an admin is using this, then they're turning Loop app on for the whole org. If you want to get granular and control that, share it with just a group or a few people, then you're still going to go into cloud policy, scope it down to the right security group, and do that. I say that it's an area of discussion still because Loop is still working their way towards compliance and adding the admin tools that we all know and love and want. And there's reasons behind that, of course. With being a flagship first-party product for using Syntex repository services, everyone who does will have the same challenge. They've got to build their own admin tools. But for now, if you do make that choice and you want to turn it on for your whole org, it's certainly become a lot easier, and something that maybe smaller organizations will do if they want to make that choice. And just wrapping up a few others. Oops, I should turn this. I didn't realize it had the audio turned on when I recorded this video. But just to wrap up some of the other announcements, you've got the Loop app available on the iPad, so that's good. It's larger format. I can't stand it when an app comes out for iPhone and the iPad one is still the skinny default version that's really supposed to be for phones. But we've got the full formatted experience, no inking support, but if you are into using the scribble feature of iPad, which means you can use a pencil and it will just turn something into text, it's across the whole iPad experience, you can use that as well. But I do find that I'm using that occasionally from my iPad. Available in the Windows Store too, which sounds like a big thing, but it's actually more of a simple thing, making it easier for people to install Loop as a progressive web app. Because many of us on this call will understand you can go to your web browser, and if you've got the option, you can install that website as an app, and it feels like an app, but we know that it's a website. For some who aren't as confident, they've wanted to make it available in the Windows Store to basically do the same thing. It's bringing it down and making it more present on your desktop. I think I like that about Loop, that if you do that, you're more likely to use it rather than it being lost in the number of tabs that you might have in your browser. So we've seen it's easier to deploy in the whole org. We've got stock images. So that was the example there of the video where we can now add different cover photos. It is stock imagery. It isn't our own custom images just yet. There are some logistical challenges, you might say, about making that happen. I thought that it would be just as simple as, why can't we just upload it? But they do have a responsibility for providing ways of making sure those images are savory and being able to report unwanted images and things like that. So all that sort of thing, but good to see that we've got some more choices there. And as a last one, you might notice that when you are working within tables, and I certainly have, where I use tables for turning them into assignments and things, you'll get like a summary row to say, look, this person has 3 things assigned to them and this person has 2. But you can also use it to do some basic math. So you can do a sum, you can average the numbers in a column, and you can do a count. So various things like that. Now there's other updates and things that are coming out, little bits and pieces here and there. And the way to find out about those, I recommend following the Microsoft Loop. Can I say this? I'm going to bring myself to say this. The X account. Ugh. Formerly known as Twitter. Sorry. You can follow that account at Microsoft Loop and look for the hashtag new in loop, and they're covering a lot of things there. Join the conversation. Well, I would like to now welcome Rob Quickenden from Cisilion. Rob and I have been connected for a bit over the socials. That's where I've made a lot of my friends, and certainly glad to be connected with Rob. He's been quite active in the community with all kinds of things across the Microsoft 365 space, and in his role as CTO at Cisilion, he gets to play with the stuff and actually make sense of it and choose directions about what they want to focus on. Rob, I don't know, I could keep introducing you, but I think I'll hand it over to you. And the way we're going to do this, Rob's going to tell us a bit about how they're using Loop and conversational. We can't call it fireside. Let's call it beachside, because you're in the beach at the moment.
Side.
Yeah, beachside. And I'll just ask a few questions as we go. So welcome, Rob.
Fab. Thank you, Daryl. I don't need to introduce myself. So I've got no slides, but I do have a loop. So I will share that if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Just checking you can all see my screen.
Yep.
Fantastic. So I thought I'd use a loop to showcase this. So I'm aware all of you know who what Loop is. I thought I'd just give you a very quick overview of me and kind of what I do, and then really just talk about our Loop journey, really kind of, how we got into Loop, why we're using it, success we've had, and just talk a little bit about it really, and really keen for kind of questions on some of those things, because I think we have had challenges. We've certainly had lots of very early successes with it, and I think there's aspects of using Loop now that I think a lot of my team and our wider team can almost imagine if you took it away, it would now cause pain, which I think is a really great place to be in when you're using a product, right? Because it's there's always that curve, right, about trying to embrace something and why should I use it? I've got other tools that do the same thing. So I was going to talk a little bit about that, and then just share a little bit of what again we feel is missing. So the common feedback that I get. So I run the success team around Loop within Cisilion. What my team tell me are the blockers, and I'm sure they're very similar to what everybody else has seen. I mean, just some of my tips really. So some of my guidance, if you're rolling this out or you have rolled it out, so thinking about rolling it out, then just kind of what I've found worked. I thought I'd share that, but feel free to stick your hand up and interrupt all the way through. So let's start off. So I don't really need to introduce myself. So as I said, really, I'm CTO at Cisilion. I've been the CTO for 5 years. Prior to that, I used to run our consulting business and our pre-sales team. Most of that hasn't changed, other than a large part of what I do is I'm the executive sponsor for our Microsoft business unit in Cisilion, which is probably the fastest growing part of our business. We do everything really in that space around modern work, so all the Microsoft 365 stack. We also do a lot with Cisco, far less in collaboration now, clearly because of Microsoft's dominance in that space. But we're really all about helping customers on their digital transformational journey, and a large part of that is really trying to help organizations just get the best out of the products that they've got. And I think when we talk about Loop to customers, it's amazing. I mean, not even just Loop, but Whiteboard and Planner and Forms and all these things. There's such a massive population of the users within an organization that just don't know that these things exist. And I think this is the biggest opportunity for Microsoft, but also the biggest problem that they have with third-party products and these kind of things. So whilst it's great to see the integrations, I think there's a lot that organizations need to do to move outside of Word, Excel and PowerPoint. And I think that's still the great opportunity. And I think Loop is a great way of doing that, right? Because it's totally different to anything anybody's ever had before. So that's a little bit about us. I thought I'd share a little bit about why we love Loop. So we got invited, obviously, we, like many of you, we saw Loop appear, announced at Ignite, then we saw it popping up in Teams for those that are on the preview, and it was quite cool. And I think everyone kind of dabbled a little bit with Loop. And it was great, but it was kind of locked. There was nowhere to get to it. You could get to it from the Office apps, but no one knew what these weird file extensions are all about, and it was just a little bit difficult. But they were actually being used quite a lot, but you obviously had no way of knowing how it was being used and knowing what was going on. So when Loop came out as a formal product, we got on it relatively quickly. As Darryl said, we were quite active in the community talking about this stuff, and we got invited to participate in the technology adoption preview. So we're using the preview version of Loop, which just means that, you know, we hopefully get to try things sooner when we have to give the feedback and those kind of things. But I thought it would be quite useful for today to so what we did when we got onto the preview was we formed a little success unit of people from different departments. I was kind of the sponsor, and we pulled together different parts of the organization, because one of the bits of feedback that we had speaking to other customers that had used it was the typical IT have tried it, right, and they would use it between their teams, but it wasn't really used. It was almost used to try and solve a problem which didn't exist. So, you know, they already had chat sites and team sites and these kind of things, and actually Loop didn't really add a lot of value in that perception, because they're already in that kind of community and they just kind of work together, and it was a bit funky, but outside of that it didn't add a lot of value. So what we did was ensured that we had, a bit like any successful technology adoption program, is we ensured we had sponsors that knew they had to feedback, that were going to be encouraged to really try and use the product and see where it fits. So, you know, even if it doesn't, try it, see where it doesn't work, feedback where it does work, shout about it. So that was one of the things that we asked people to do. We asked them to commit 15 minutes every week. In reality, it takes them far less than that, just to share, you know, what have they looked about this week? So where have they found it useful, and those things. We keep a log of those things. Some of that I can't, there's some nasty swear words in some of it, I can't share all of that with you. But I did share this with the team last week. Just say, look, just give me a little bit of a snapshot of who you are, where you work, but really kind of what's the main uses that you've seen for Loop? What do you believe it solves for you? And then talk about some of the challenges and the things that, you know, you think you need to make it better. So what's kind of missing, right? And there's a common theme. And Darryl, you'll probably tell me lots of things about the roadmap, which is or not, which is which is always good. So, you know, for me, and I think you touched on some of these points before, you know, I really find it fantastic for just grabbing those kind of ideas about something, whether it's planning an event, whether it's looking at a new proposition we're doing, something we should be doing around ESG, or whatever it is we're doing. It's really great just to pull kind of different bits of content together and structure those. And we tend to use, or I tend to use Loop almost in the same way that I use OneNote. I've been a OneNote user since company I worked for many years ago, with the education launch partner for Windows XP tablet. So that was all about OneNote, right? So the very early days of OneNote XP and pen. So anyone that knows me knows I don't go anywhere without a pen. I am always digitally inking on my Surface, and that's a primary thing for me. And we'll come on to that in a minute. So it was really powerful, I think, to use that. So I tend to structure my workspaces within Loop in a similar way that I would structure a workbook within OneNote. A lot of my team don't do that. They're probably, I would say, more disorganized, but maybe that's the point, in that they just literally have those kind of collections of things together. And in fact, one of my team has just got a Loop component, a Loop page, which is his link back to all his random loops, which is quite good. So it's a bit like your recent, but it's kind of like all my loops as kind of one thing, and it'd be quite a nice feature, right? Because that's a manual thing to kind of collate. But for me, it is that, you know, it keeps me out of email and keeps me out of chat. And I think, you know, we've all talked about the death of email, right, for about 20 years. And it's never really happened. But this goes a long way, I think, to, while something might start there, this really removes a lot of that reply to all, or those pointless group chats that don't really go anywhere and no one can catch up. So for me, you know, absolutely massive. But the big blocker is that you can't use it externally. So as soon as you start to go external, and we do a lot of work with clients, it's a real blocker, and you end up then having to go back. All the great benefits that you get by using those collaborative tools go away when you have to revert back to email or a shared document or those kind of things. So I think when that comes, it's going to have a massive, I think it will just drive adoption hugely. Feedback is great. One of the things that we do a lot is if we're working on a document, rather than give everyone access to the document, we'll take part of that document out, and we'll paste it into a Loop component, and we'll share that aspect of it so that they can have read access to the document, but they can actually modify a component. Now, we'd love that to be interchangeable, so almost have like a template, if you like, with editable components that people can edit, and that would be lovely. But you can do quite a lot with that. And again, you touched on this earlier, collaborative meeting notes in Teams are just phenomenal. And I think, it's a bit, adoption's a tough one, because when you create a new meeting within Teams, the default is you fill out the text at the top rather than the bottom bit, which is the collaborative notes. And so you end up with either both or none being filled out. But again, I tend to find once you start to use the notes in Teams, everyone dives in and uses them. And when they start seeing actions popping up and to-dos popping up, it's phenomenal. And I think it's that integration that just makes that really, really powerful. And to me, it's absolutely a game changer. So I can't wait for that to be in Outlook, because most people still set up meetings for Outlook. And more so, people set up meetings from their phone in Outlook. And of course, you miss the ability to do those things. Take a breath. Any questions?
No, and I think you're covering a lot of good points here, Rob, especially setting the tone for how you've got people to give feedback, and you're actually demonstrating a great way of doing that. I'm sure what you did was you created a component, dropped in a table, and shared that with people across your team to add content. Would that be right?
I can share that in a minute. Absolutely. So I was going to say that's how we did it. So I started off really badly, and I'll come on to that at the end. So I started off and I sent an email out to a team. I did it on my phone, and it was just before I went away, and asked people for their feedback. And so I started to get responses, reply to all. And I was like, whoa, hold on a minute. So I stopped. I waited till, it's hard to do on mobile, actually. I waited till I got somewhere. I had my laptop with me, obviously, partly for this. And I did it again. So I kind of ignored my email, created a new email, inserted a Loop component, and I've literally just dropped that component in here. So there are people that haven't fed back because they've been on holiday, but if they do feedback, which they probably will, what's great is that will update this. So I haven't then got to recopy and paste that component. That component's obviously living everywhere. And that's really cool, except that I think from an adoption perspective, some users get that they're not quite sure what will happen if they remove it. So you kind of get that, do I copy it? Do I remove it? They almost kind of want that, well, where's the source and what's it connected to? And if I delete it from here, does it delete? And I get a lot of that that kind of comes up, and they almost kind of want like a bit of a where is this used type feature. So what else was kind of really cool? I've not read all of this. So some of our customer experience team use it for, they use the trackers a lot. So they assign actions and they track tasks, and they almost use it as an ongoing, almost like a planner board, really. But they live in here, and of course they assign their tasks. So they've got their kind of ideas, thoughts, actions, snippets of information, and their to-dos. I mean, their to-dos, obviously they're syncing, so it's quite a nice way of using it. Lots of use of mobile app, which is great. So when they're out and about with the teams, then they're collating information from their clients, and they're actually updating in real time, which is great. There's lots of asks about undos and version controls and these kind of things, which gets really difficult when you've got something that's a totally collaborative experience. But feedback's feedback, and I've told them to log it. But for me, the big thing we do a lot of is write and update solution papers, service definitions, these kind of things. And actually that is just so much easier to not do in a document, but to do in sections within Loop. It's then just the task of, and again, the kind of things that lots of people are asked to do is be great to be able to then lock a loop. So it's kind of like you've been drafting it, now it's locked. So then you can go to then let someone else take it and go, right, I'm now going to put that into its proper source document, but you've got the original in the format it was in that's locked. So that's something I've seen quite a lot of. Marketing love it. They love everything. Marketing, let's be honest, it's marketing. They love everything. But yeah, one of their things is just, again, their comment about what they need was useful, in that they're always saying, people struggle to remember, that muscle memory is quite fixed, and people default to an email, right? You get on the train, you send an email, maybe they send a Teams message now, but that kind of, insert loop, keep reminding people. If you start inserting, please can you tell me about it, right? And I think with some of the things coming into Viva Insights and into Copilot, I hope that some of that intelligent tips will actually come in to help people really use the right tool. But yeah, loads of happy to share this, but loads of great examples, I think, of how the teams are using stuff. Biggest thing, external sharing. So client success team, again, they want to be able to share these live collaborative ideas and thoughts and improvement programs with their customers, and they're just duplicating work by not being able to do that. And everyone just expects it, and we know the complexities of how these things work in the background, but I think it's expected that it should just be really simple. Why can't you? If I send an email, I could send email for 30 years. I can send it to anybody. And that's kind of the mentality that kind of goes on. What else are we keeping? So we're keeping a bit of a log of, and we feed as much of this back as we can through the various channels, but I'm sure all of this will be similar to what the rest of you are experiencing. But the key big things of our so what's top on our list of the things that's needed. Teams channels. I don't know how well Teams channels get used by people, but every time someone tries to use them, there's something you can't do, so they don't use them. But I think this would be to be able to have a loop component in a channel, because that's the whole point of using Teams and channels, I think would be really, really powerful. And then of course the loop stays with the channel rather than being in your personal OneDrive, which of course is what happens if you start a loop in a chat. External stuff, absolutely. We get a lot of asks for things like dropping other live components like Power BI dashboards and those kind of things, which I guess makes sense from a, it's not about editable content, it's about live dashboards. I think that's possible, actually. I've not tried it, but this is I just pulled this from our top list. And better permissions management was an interesting one. That's come up quite a lot. So what they mean by that is, it's sometimes, depending on how your sharing is set up, if you've got if you, for example, created an email, inserted your loop component, and then you forward that email, or someone else forwards that email to somebody else, unless your permissions are set so that everyone has access to every component as default, which most organizations won't, they can't access that loop. So you get a little bit of, you almost need a little bit of that the cleverness that happens in OneDrive now, where it goes, some people won't have access to this. You might want to check. So don't know if anyone else has had that experience at all, but that's one of those things that then again removes people from using it, and they just default back to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah, I have seen that that experience of nudging you and saying, hey, this person isn't in the workspace. When it turns someone's name into a plus sign, and then you got the opportunity to invite them into the workspace or share that. But I think what and you might see this too, Rob, that whether it be permissions management, thinking about even using loop and loop components, it's almost like its own, the name suggests even the nature of the problem, that we have to think like we are in Inception, that we're, if we're sharing something in Outlook, well, is Outlook enabled yet to be able to tell us, does this person have access to this file? Or I'm in a chat, but I don't think to use that little messaging extension because I'm still getting used to using chats and Teams channels. So it's like, to think loop, we've almost got to think, okay, we're here, we're collaborating now, but we've got to form those habits, that muscle memory.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I think that was the last bit, if I'm all right for time, I was going to cover, really, was just some of what I've seen and speaking to, I've used your hashtag as well, and some of the things that, which is not just myself, but some of the work we've done with some of our customers that are, and I think dabbling is probably the view that a lot of organizations are in. And I think that's always been some of the problems that Microsoft have around their product sets, right? I mean, everyone says, you only use 10% of any product. And to your point about what people using, people say, yeah, we use Teams everywhere. Do you use Teams or do you use chat? Right? Is it basically Skype for Business? It's just is a better version of those things. And I see that a lot, even down to people not knowing how to use rich text in fields or any of those things. I mean, the amount of people I show, if you press the slash button in the top of the search bar, you can do all this amazing stuff. And I think this is the thing. I think Microsoft have actually got really good in some of their admin centers now, showing you all the things that are new and giving that little. And you almost need the ability in their apps to go, we're rolling this is in rollout mode. Keep giving tooltips, keep telling people, have you tried Loop? Because you need to drive people to these things. Unless you've got a really good success unit within your organization, which depending on the size, you may not, or you may be using, for example, Darryl, this is what you specialize in, right? Or you're using, a local partner to help you drive technology adoption and success. Microsoft needs to do a little bit more there's loads of tools out there for admins, but there's not a lot out there. It's just almost assumed that everyone knows how to use this stuff, and they don't, and I think if it's Netflix on their phone, they'll figure it out because they want to watch the latest thing. If it's BBC Sports, they'll figure it out because they want to watch it. But if it's a component they use for work and it's too difficult, they won't. So I think that getting people to use it is really, really key. I think definitely, Darryl, some of the services that you obviously provide and others like you, I think are really valuable where organizations don't have those things, even just to set up the base templates of how do you actually go about deploying technology that fundamentally changes the way in which you might work and collaborate. This is not just a new feature. This is actually quite a shift in how you work. And I think when we think about things like Copilot, I know we've spoken about Copilot a lot, that's another one. It's going to be an absolute game changer, but to get success from it, people have got to change how they work. And I think that's that's an interesting one. So
Rob, a question on that, like while we are talking about adoption, your team have adopted it, and you've actually said that it's kind of got to a point where it's become a tool you would miss if it was taken away. What were, and I think you've listed these really, but just recap it from a journey point of view, what were the key scenarios that actually gave this value, that actually brought people in to want to collaborate, that helped with adoption? Because I think when you just turn it on and say, here you go, here's a workspace, go for your life, a lot of people just go, well, question mark, isn't this, it just looks like OneNote. But with yourself and your team, you went through a few things that actually started to get gravity and help people understand good uses of Loop.
Yeah, so we and again we didn't go through, we're 160 people, so we're not a huge organization. We don't have a dedicated sort of training team. I kind of tend to, and not always me, but I tend to be just someone that it's new tech. I want to play with it. I want to talk to my customers about it. It's great. So we set up this little unit, and I think that is absolutely key, right? Have representation, whatever you want to call it. Have people that like playing with stuff across the organization, and do make sure that they are going to champion and they're going to feedback. But you want them to share success more than feedback on bad stuff, but share success, right? And we started really easily. So what we asked them to do with their teams is to start using Loop within Teams. So, because most of them didn't know it was there, been there for ages, didn't know what the button did. Nice little button. People are scared to press it, right? Scared to touch it. So we got them to literally tell them, we're going to do, I'm going to send you an email, or they sent an email and said, we're using this new thing. Could you please, just click on the link. Should be self-explanatory, off you go. And so they all had slightly different ways of doing it, but it was all about just starting with components, right? Really just trying to get them to go, oh, this is quite funky. And then they would say, right, actually now, could you forward that loop to someone else? And how do I do that? It's in a message. Oh, you can simply copy it and paste it into an email. Oh, wow. So part of what we did on that journey was just to start almost just dangling it in front of their eyes to kind of go, oh, this is quite cool. And what we found was some just ignored it. Another tool, I'll just use email. But the majority of them, I'd say probably 60-70%, which is pretty good, were like, this is quite cool, because it is. Everyone loves that when you can see the little cursor moving and you've got multiple little faces of people moving along. It's really cool. So that was the kind of the big thing we did. The other thing that we did very quickly, and I appreciate not everybody can do this, but we enabled it for everyone, right? Because otherwise you come into that problem where you forward something to somebody else and they can't get to it. So you're back into that, and appreciate there will be some organizations that will struggle with that from a compliance perspective, and that's coming, right? The ability to have all those compliance controls will be there, but it might be a blocker. But I think for most, it's not. And in fact, I work with law firms, insurance firms, and most of those haven't had an issue for using it internally, right? Which is generally at the moment, that's what they can do anyway. So a lot of those kind of security controls aren't so much of a problem, but I think it definitely helps. If you're a small organization anyway, you need to get herds of people using it. I think the other thing that I would say is my points under there about the remember is people are stuck in their ways, right? And some of the people that will benefit most from any new tool are the ones that don't want to learn something new. So, they will be stuck in their ways, and you need to show them why it's great. And that's why we share the feedback, right? And we do a weekly update internally that goes, these are some of the great stories. I think we're now down to over a couple of weeks now. And the other thing is you need to remember they'll forget it. They'll go away on holiday. They'll come back, except me, they'll come back and they'll just go back to those habits again. So it is really about that reinforcement of use, which is why we find that little panel works quite well. And they tend to go into loop overdrive, is that they probably use it too much for things that maybe it's not the best use for, because they're trying to drive usage, right? And they're trying to showcase. And I think what we've also found is that team of people, there's like nine in our little success unit that are the sponsors. They now are kind of, have you seen what they're doing? Have you seen what they're doing? Look, most of them follow you, Daryl, now, so they tend to get most of their resource from you. But it's really great, and they do share with each other things that are going on, and I think that's a really powerful thing. My kind of other comment was that use it everywhere, but do be mindful of where you can't, because that's where it disappoints. I think for every 3 or 4 steps forward you have with success, whenever you find someone that's trying, I can't use it externally, it kind of knocks it down a run. So I think, Teams chats, absolutely. We talked about collaborative meeting notes, but I think particularly for recurring meetings, I mean, that's why I think they're most valuable, where you end up with static notes that are out of date. I've got agendas for meetings that were set up 3 years ago, and we never follow what's on the agenda because the agenda is static from 3 years ago. Every agenda is now up to date and dynamic. Really powerful. Emails where you need feedback. So if you're asking people to respond back on something or vote for something, use a component, even if it's literally just a voting thing, I find it's really useful. And the app is great, actually. We've we pinned it automatically to people's edge bars, but just using it for that drafting work is really great. Now the mobile experience I find is quite naff still. It's it doesn't really support a lot of formatting properly. Things don't look like they do, which I know they won't, but I haven't seen the iPad version. But I do find the experience we get on mobile, particularly myself on the Android, is quite quite plain texty still. But yeah, I mean, I use it for all these sorts of things. I could do this in OneNote, but I find it's just a lot better. I mean, I think that when not to use it, and this is quite controversial, and we've had conversations about this OneNote thing, right? But I think for many, you could use it. Depending on how you use OneNote, you could use it like OneNote, particularly with things like the tasks and stuff. For me, what this lacks is ink. Now I don't know whether I could ever see ink coming into this or not, but I'm a big ink user. I like to use my Surface and I like to draw. I like to do those kind of things. But to me, that's kind of note taking, and therefore that is probably what I'd continue to use OneNote for. But I'm a little bit not quite sure between those two things. Externally, don't try, because it's terrible. You can't do it, and that's the problem with collaborative meeting notes as well, because it's a great habit to get into, but then you invite a third party, and sometimes they see the notes tab because they might have it they'll have it in their organization, but of course they click on it and they can't get to it. So it's just a bit I've been in meetings with Microsoft before, and they've taken notes using it, and they're all proud that they're using it. I mean, it's like, I'll put all the notes, and it's like, I can't. You'll need to copy those out and email them to me.
And it's funny too when they do share that link with you and expect that you can get to it, like they haven't quite got to grips with their own tools.
Got it themselves. No, totally.
There's some good questions here in the chat too, in terms of topics around components and components versus the app that Hilda, Rene, they've caught on to using Loop for the places that you're currently working. I think that's what really resonates with me, and Rene nods as well too, that it's about being able to collaborate in the place that you're in.
Meeting une fois par mois?
Oh, hello. And it's but then how do we get that use of the Loop app to work, and why would we use it? And I think the bridging thing, and this is just a tip for those of you on the call, but maybe I'll just quickly share my screen just to show this. So Loop Workspace, and I've got it installed as a progressive web app. So when I am in Loop, let's just jump into here, for example, we've got the recent menu. And the recent menu, not only is it showing you content that you might have added and changed within Loop workspaces, but also components. So that if you see this one here, it's most recently used as a thing within Outlook. So if I open this up here, it's available in chat and Outlook, and I can bring that into a Loop workspace. So as part of a way of bringing some of these disparate things that are all over the place. This was to your question, I think, Sam. How do we bring all this stuff together? It's a case of, here I am in the Loop. I've got a couple of ways to do this. Here's my shared locations. We're going to find where these things are being shared. What's the source? Well, that's the original where it was created. And I can add that to a workspace that might be related to that. So here it is. It's added to the workspace, and it's actually linked to the workspace. It hasn't moved that Loop page, that Loop file, into where the workspace is actually stored, but it is going some way to making it available for me together with other related Loop content, if that helps.
Yeah, I think that's changed, I would say recently-ish, because I don't recall that being quite as verbose as that. That's actually a lot better than I remember it. Which I think is that point of, this is still an evolving product, and sometimes you go into there's no way of doing that. I mean, you come back a little bit later, and that's the thing with cloud, isn't it? And it's completely changed. So it's there needs to be, like I say, I think there really needs to be more ways of reminding people what's great, because it is, unless you're going to read all the blogs and all the updates and stuff, it's easy to forget. And I think I've learned something from that, so thank you for sharing that, because that solves a lot of those challenges, I think, with my team.
And Sam, like you've turned your video on too, but feel free to expand on that question. Like, I know that's one of the challenges, where do all these loops live, but tell us more.
Well, I guess the question for me is, when you're creating loops that live within Teams meetings or from Outlook components, and you create it from those elements and not within Loop, I don't know where they go. Like, that's just like, I know how to find them, but having like a list of or being able to tell, hey, all my stand-up meeting notes should go to this workspace. I don't
Right.
like that level of control isn't there yet. I was just wondering if you guys had solved that or had a solution to that.
Yeah, it is wherever you're adding loop content, loop components when you're in an app, it tends to default to saving that content within the OneDrive of the person who created the component. And I get why that's a strategy and why they've gone in that direction, because if you think about OneDrive as being a place that organizations are a bit reluctant to have content from sites or teams that are shared publicly. But if sometimes they've given that ability to share a component, a file, a something from their OneDrive externally. Now, we don't have external capabilities yet for Loop, but that's where once it is turned on, it's easier to share that with someone in a meeting if it's just part of that OneDrive. It also, to some extent, removes some of that friction of, okay, we're going to collaborate. So maybe we're in this chat here in this meeting now. We're going to collaborate. Great. What are we going to do? Well, which OneNote, which place, which file, we're already slowing things down. Whereas if we can just start that collaboration and not have too much thought about where it is, it often will go to OneDrive. What we want to see, and I understand the challenge around this, is what we can do with files is we can move that Word or that PowerPoint into a shared space so that we're following good collaborative practice. The life cycle of a document, it started with me and my ideas, but now I want to put it into a space where the rest of my team can get to it. And there are some challenges, as you might understand, that if we've already looped and shared and exposed and linked it from our OneDrive, what happens when we take that file and put it in the team that we want it to be its final resting place? It breaks all the links there. So yeah, lots of sort of things to figure out, and it kind of comes back to that question, and Rob was talking about, what about loops within teams and team channels? What does that look like? And they want to make sure that that experience is good before they make it available. Seems like a simple problem, but not so. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it
think
almost needs that I've just looked at that updated sharing that you talked about, and it's just crying out for, because you've got the ability from within there. So I've just looked at the one I created. You can see it came from an email. It gives me a really simple way to copy it into another workspace. But you need to be able to go move to this, and what you want it to be able to do is move it to the workspace and update those links, don't you? So now they can still update it from those components, but it's now central. So if I disappear and leave, that wonderful document that everyone's done doesn't die with me in my when my OneDrive gets purged. Yeah.
If there was some way to redirect that embed, if you know what I mean. So the link is still going to be what it is, wherever it is. If it's shared in a conversation, an Outlook email or something, that link, we're not going to be able to reach out and change that. But surely there might be some way to, direct that permission and the ability to see that loop wherever it has been embedded. Lots of different ways to see where your loop content is, but it's still like, how many people will sign into Microsoft365.com and use that as their homepage as a starting point? Probably not too many. They don't know that they can come down here and say, I want to see all my loop components.
Goes back to that point, doesn't it? They're so powerful, these tools. It's where I start my day, but people don't. They it's back in. And even when you suggest some of the work we're doing with customers at the moment around Copilot readiness, right, is all about because at the moment it was going to be limited to the new Outlook client or the web apps. But the perception for a lot of people of the web apps is they're still thinking of Outlook web access from like Exchange 2000 days, and it's like it's better in many cases than it's not what you think it is. It's actually really good, but they don't go there.
Yeah, so there's a lot of changes in this as they take feedback to try and help people from wherever they're starting. And there are really two places to start, as Renee said a bit earlier in the chat. You can either start from the place that you're working, Teams, Outlook, Word Online, Whiteboard, various other places that are coming, or you start to form that habit around having Loop open as a app experience like I have and working from there. And wherever you are starting, you want to be able to see, well, what is the recent Loop content that I've been working on? Because that's the pattern that we're used to, isn't it? If we're in Word, my recent documents. If we're in our OneDrive, what is it that's been shared with me recently? So if we see that same pattern, people are going to pick up on that and continue with the habits that have already formed around other Office experiences. Yeah. Hey, we're almost at the hour, so I kind of did want to round it out. And I know we didn't get to do our breakout groups because we weren't large enough. We sometimes find this, that we might have a group of about 20 or 30 people that start. And I even found that when I said, hey, so now we're going to do breakout groups, about 2/3 of the people disappear. So we usually sort of, continue to chat if we've got this group going here. But thank you all for joining, and definitely thank you, Rob, for coming along and sharing your experiences from Cisilion. And it's a pattern, really, I think, that we do need to do occasionally a bit more to share how we're using it. I really like some of the stories you told about how your team are using it, how they're sharing their experiences, and bringing things in together and making use of the various things that are available in Loop today. So thank you all for your questions too. Yeah, excellent. And I will try and organize something sooner rather than later. Maybe we'll do a bit of a deep dive next time into Trello and Jira and whatever else comes in terms of third-party or first-party components. But yeah, thanks. And do, continue to have those conversations in the LinkedIn group that we have available for Loop as well. So thanks all for coming, and
thanks all.
See you again next time.
See you soon. Bye-bye.